For a 3-day series of conversations, the RISE conference will explore today's challenges, tomorrow's solutions, and the next steps needed to build a new paradigm for higher education, one that will be highly transformative in strengthening resilience. Join us for an interactive set of conversations as we embark on building a national framework for higher education to address the growing threat of climate change and weather extremes.
Breaking news tonight, Hurricane Maria hammering Puerto Rico with a direct hit.
Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico in September 2017 as a Category 4 hurricane with winds of 155 miles per hour. It is regarded as one of the deadliest and most destructive hurricanes in U.S. history. The storm wreaked havoc on the island, with economic loss and property damage exceeding $90 billion, killing an estimated 2,975 people.
One official saying the island is destroyed.
The recovery and rebuilding efforts across the country to help Puerto Rico were far-reaching.
The devastation of the island is really breathtaking. These people need a lot of help.
As part of this effort,
No, I'm not. I'm just making a short announcement. Oh, okay. Don't start anything official. Good morning, everyone. Zana? We're going to be starting up in about 5 minutes. If you want to grab your last cup of coffee, find your seat. We'll be with you shortly.
Do you know what laptop it is by chance?
Breaking news tonight, Hurricane Maria hammering Puerto Rico with a direct hit.
Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico in September 2017 as a Category 4 hurricane with winds of 155 miles per hour. It is regarded as one of the deadliest and most destructive hurricanes in U.S. history. The storm wreaked havoc on the island, with economic loss and property damage exceeding $90 billion, killing an estimated 2,975 people.
One official saying the island is destroyed.
The recovery and rebuilding efforts across the country to help Puerto Rico were far-reaching.
The devastation of the island is really breathtaking. These people need a lot of help.
As part of this effort, universities and colleges nationwide traveled to Puerto Rico with the purpose of pursuing quick response research, service learning, student exchange, and humanitarian relief, all of which were greatly needed. While well-intended, these efforts highlighted several areas of the university-community relationship during the pre- and post-disaster environment that are in need of study. In the aftermath of Maria, faculty from the University of Puerto Rico, led by RISE co-chairs Marla Perez Lugo and Cecilia Ortiz Garcia, invited scholars and researchers from universities and colleges nationwide to Mayagüez, Puerto Rico. Nearly 100 representatives from 26 universities examined the challenges and critical issues facing higher education and the communities in which they serve during disaster and crisis. Building upon this work, the RISE 2019 conference was born. Led by the University at Albany, the National Council for Science and the Environment, and over 25 universities and colleges, RISE 2019 will bring together leaders from higher education, the private sector, government, and communities nationwide this November. RISE 2019 will foster a national conversation to explore ways in which institutions of higher education can strengthen preparedness, response, and recovery in the face of growing threats posed by climate change and extreme weather, while using Puerto Rico as a case study. Over a 3-day series of conversations, the RISE conference will explore today's challenges, tomorrow's solutions, and the next steps needed to build a new paradigm for higher education, one that will be highly transformative in strengthening resilience. Join us for an interactive set of conversations as we embark on building a national framework for higher education to address the growing threat of climate change and weather extremes.
Good morning, everyone. We have about 2 minutes, so if you can top off your coffee, find a seat, and settle in, we'll get the program started. Thank you.
Breaking news tonight. Hurricane Maria hammering Puerto Rico with a direct hit.
Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico in September 2017 as a Category 4 hurricane with winds of 155 miles per hour. It is regarded as one of the deadliest and most destructive hurricanes in U.S. history. The storm wreaked havoc on the island, with economic loss and property damage exceeding $90 billion.
Is that it? You wanted to stop it?
Perfect. Also a good sign.
Can I close this or not? Where's the IT? Where's the IT? We're good. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. If you're walking around, please do us a favor and take your seat. Good morning. Muy buenos días. Welcome. Welcome to the University at Albany. To all of you, thank you so very much for being here. Thank you for taking your time to come from across the state of New York, from across the nation, and from Puerto Rico. Welcome to the University at Albany, and welcome to RISE 2019. A mis compañeros y compañeras de la Isla del Encanto, muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros en esta conferencia tan importante. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a su casa, y como dice la canción, Borinquen vive, vive Borinquen. I've personally been looking forward to this day for some time now. Today is the realization of a strong desire to build upon a significant gathering that took place in Mayagüez, Puerto Rico in June of 2018, 9 months after Hurricane Maria struck. This was a time when the island was still reeling from the devastating impacts of one of the deadliest and costliest hurricanes in Puerto Rico's and the United States history. Out of this gathering, the RISE platform was born. Today, we embark on a new chapter of this work. Today, we are realizing the dream that we can significantly build upon the strong foundation that was built last year in Mayagüez, Puerto Rico. And we do so with you, with all of you. Today, our participants include more than 400 people. Just look around you, representing about 175 institutions and organizations across the United States and Puerto Rico, including colleges and universities, government, local, statewide, and federal, nonprofit organizations, industry and business, research centers, community, and the media. This includes over 35 sponsoring institutions and organizations, over 100 colleges and universities. Please take a look at your conference program on page 60 for a full and amazing list of these institutions and organizations. Also, page 64 and 65 of the program includes the list of sponsors that made this conference possible, ranging from our RISE 2019 sponsors, including the United States Environmental Protection Agency and the Coastal Resilience Center, to our gold, our silver, bronze, and sustaining partners. The financial support of these organizations was critical to the success of RISE 2019. Thank you all for your support, and let's give our sponsors a round of applause. The group of RISE 2019 participants represents an extraordinary array of disciplines. In addition to prominent higher education leaders, over 180 speakers and panelists are scholars and experts in emergency preparedness, public policy, atmospheric science, environmental sciences, social sciences, linguistics, and engineering, among other fields and professions. This is critical because the complex challenges of this work require input and expertise from a very broad coalition of partners. I must say that I am also very ecstatic that there are dear colleagues here and friends with us today from my 3 former institutions, the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, the University of Delaware, and the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. How neat is that? And so over the next 3 days, we're going to embark on a journey to explore how we can collectively create a better future for communities that experience disasters or are at risk of experiencing disasters, and the critical role of institutions of higher education in this process. This brings me to what is the most important responsibility for me this morning, and that is to recognize some of the people who have helped us reach this moment and who are going to continue to be critical drivers in this work after RISE 2019 concludes on Wednesday. As the 20th president of the University at Albany, my name is Avidan Rodriguez, and I am very, very pleased to recognize the 2 leaders and co-chairs of RISE 2019, Dr. Marla Perez Lugo and Dr. Cecilio Ortiz Garcia. Both Marla and Cecilio are faculty members at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, and are senior fellows at the National Council for Science and the Environment. In addition to convening the gathering last year, Marla and Cecilio have been dreaming big about how to take RISE to the next level. Again, let's give Cecilio and Marla a round of applause. And I know that their energy and focus found a willing partner in the National Council for Science and Environment, and I want to thank NCSC and especially its Executive Director, Michelle Wyman, who has been a strong advocate and supporter of this RISE 2019. NCSC has really played a critical role in this process, so Michelle, thank you so very much. We sincerely appreciate the support and engagement of the members of the Honorary Committee. Also, the Steering Committee was absolutely essential in the planning, development, and implementation of this wonderful conference. Will the members of the Honorary and Steering Committees please rise and be recognized? I would certainly be remiss if I did not recognize the strong commitment and the excellent work with very positive outcomes of the SUNY Puerto Rico Task Force. Also, thanks to all the SUNY institutions represented here today through their senior administrators, faculty, staff, and students, you have done critical work in Puerto Rico, so muchísimas gracias to you as well. And to our many faculty, staff, and students at UAlbany, at SUNY, at CUNY, and throughout the country, including Puerto Rico, who for the past 2 years have been part of our rebuilding and reconstruction efforts in Puerto Rico. And I know some of you are here today. Your contributions and experiences have been a critical part of the development of this platform, and your ongoing participation in these conversations are invaluable. And the role of NGOs, community organizations, and federal, state, and city organizations, some represented here today, were also critically important in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And then for today, there's the team at UAlbany who accepted the challenge to organize this very significant event, and their continued and ongoing work to make today possible has truly been exceptional. Our Division of Research, under the leadership of Vice President for Research, Jim Diaz, led the way. But a very special thank you and recognition goes to Vince Delio, Tianan Juan, Kyla Whitehouse, along with Abinay Tiwari and Ujash Darman Modi. This has been for them an almost 24/7 project for the past few months, and their work has been simply outstanding. Vince, to you and your staff, thank you so very much. And when you go back home, you will always be expecting an email from Vince. So I would also like to thank the office, the UAlbany Office of the President, the Office of University Events, the Office of Communications and Marketing, Information Technology, our facilities staff, and our campus center staff, Sodexo, and so many others that will make these 3 days entirely a successful event for RISE 2019. And again, let's give them a round of applause. We usually wait to the end of these conferences to thank everybody, and half of the people are already gone. So it's important to recognize all these folks at the beginning of the conference so that you can provide your enthusiastic thank you when you see them. And special thanks also goes to someone who has been the driving force in the state of New York behind the extraordinary efforts and commitments to the people of Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, and that is our governor, Governor Andrew Cuomo. The governor is not able to join us today, but he sends his greetings and well wishes, and he has done an extraordinary work in our initiative, New York Stands with Puerto Rico, disseminating resources and efforts and time and staff to work with the people in Puerto Rico to help during the recovery process. So to Governor Andrew Cuomo, our very special thanks. We also want to recognize another champion for our work in Puerto Rico, a great colleague and exceptional friend, the Chancellor of the City University of New York, Dr. Felix Rodriguez Matos. He will be joining us tomorrow, but his strong commitment to this initiative is also critically important to highlight. And so while I'm here, let me also give a shout out to all the CUNY faculty, staff, and students who join us today. The SUNY-CUNY Puerto Rico partnerships were instrumental and had a significant impact in New York Stands with Puerto Rico recovery and reconstruction efforts, as I said, spearheaded by the governor. And we as New Yorkers are also very proud to have strong commitment and dedication from the nation's largest comprehensive system of public higher education, the State University of New York. And this brings me to the introduction of our next speaker, SUNY Chancellor Christina Johnson. Chancellor Johnson has been a nationally leading advocate of post-Maria recovery efforts, playing a key role in the governor's New York Stands with Puerto Rico initiative and convening the SUNY Puerto Rico Task Force, which I am honored to co-chair along with SUNY Maritime President Michael Alfutis. Chancellor Johnson has been at the vanguard of these efforts nationally and internationally, committing SUNY's resources and expertise to play a positive and impactful role in Puerto Rico's recovery. Señoras y señores, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to welcome to the podium Chancellor Christina Johnson.
Well, good morning, and thank you. Yes, good morning, President Rodriguez, for setting just the right tone for RISE 2019. And kudos to you, your team, and the co-chairs of this conference for using the convening power of the Academy to facilitate this necessary, important, and timely conversation. Distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, we have an extraordinary opportunity to focus the power of higher education on preparing for and recovering from natural and man-made disasters. And by the power of higher education, I'm speaking about our most valuable resource, you, our faculty, students, staff, and academic leaders who commit their time and expertise to study and develop best practices to help our communities when they are in crisis and are most vulnerable. We all remember where we were when the devastating hurricanes of 2017 hit the U.S. mainland, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Hurricane Harvey had inundated Houston on August 25th, 2017. A little less than 2 weeks before I was to start my new job as Chancellor of the State University of New York. I called the chairman of the board at the time, H. Carl McCall, and our conversation quickly turned immediately to what could we do to help the citizens and fellow colleagues in Texas. I reached out to the chancellor of the UT system, who was Bill McCraven at the time, and asked him what they needed. He said they needed water and blankets. From there were more calls with SUNY staff and an email from Admiral Michael Alfoltis, president of SUNY Maritime. He told me he had a large vessel, the Empire State 6, that could carry 600 cadets and supplies to Houston. Now, I knew we had 64 campuses, 1.2 million students, 90,000 faculty and staff, and a national laboratory, but who knew we had a big ship? And then I got a call from President Rodriguez. President Rodriguez said that he had a College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity. What resources from such an incredible system we could bring to bear? So what does a chancellor do when two presidents call? You immediately appoint them to do something, which is what I did. And they were wildly enthusiastic. And I appointed President Alfoltis and Rodriguez to co-chair the SUNY Puerto Rico Response Task Force. But we didn't know yet that Maria was going to pummel Puerto Rico. Together, though, we started to work before the task force was formed to come up with a plan which included a fundraiser to collect donations to buy water, blankets, and non-perishable food items and fuel to power the Empire State 6 to Houston. Governor Cuomo asked FEMA to activate the ship, which happened on September 1st. We raised $30,000 to purchase pallets of water and blankets that were delivered to the Bronx and loaded onto the ship. I started as chancellor on September 5th, and the Empire State 6 set sail for Houston on September 9th. However, on September 10th, Hurricane Irma hit the Florida Keys, redirecting the ship to help with the rescue efforts there. And then Hurricane Maria made landfall, devastating Puerto Rico on September 20th, the strongest storm to impact the island in 90 years. And the Empire State 6 was once again redirected at the behest of Governor Cuomo, reaching out to FEMA, and it moored off the shore of San Juan. That put us on a course that brings us here today, a little more than 2 years later. Governor Cuomo's call to action, recovery, and to help rebuild the island, Puerto Rico, was answered by all of you in this room, working through your respective institutions, CUNY, SUNY, and across the country, and we're very grateful. So you see, our rescue mission was a collective, collaborative effort that used every relevant SUNY resource that could be of service, with our students playing a critical role of support, along with our faculty, administrators, and state government officials. In fact, a huge shout out to our students, because when the Empire 6 sailed again for Puerto Rico just a few months later, there were 500 student volunteers from SUNY Maritime, University at Albany, and SUNY ESF on board as part of the initial rebuilding effort. We then, thank you. We then sent 250 students over an 8-week period of time in the summer of 2018, joined by more than 250 students from CUNY. And this past summer, we came back again. SUNY and CUNY together deployed another 500 students to Puerto Rico to continue the work. New York State, under Governor Cuomo's leadership, is committed to helping Puerto Rico recover and rebuild after the devastating hurricane. In fact, the governor has taken 6 different trips to Puerto Rico since Hurricane Maria to give his help and to personally assess what more needs to be done. President Rodriguez, President Alfoltis, and I joined the SUNY and CUNY students in Puerto Rico, swinging sledgehammers and helping rebuild homes destroyed by the hurricane. And we deployed solar panels and battery storage at a local community right near the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, so that when and if another hurricane takes down the power grid, that town will have a place where citizens can go and charge their phones and get information about the recovery efforts. So here's why, in my view, we're here today, because when a disaster strikes, you don't have the luxury of time to figure out what needs to be done and in what order. And there's a really interesting article, I don't have time now in this presentation to go into it, but it's by Peter Pronovost, who was at Hopkins, where I was provost. He talks about the power of the checklist. And he developed a checklist so that when someone is found under the ice, that they actually can be revived, even if they've been underwater for 45 minutes. But it's a specific number of things that have to be done in the right order immediately. And that's what we're here today to come up with, those emergency response protocols and procedures that will help us recover, because in the first few minutes of disaster, being timely and doing things in the right order is very important. And we must do so urgently. You know, climate change is here, and we are all on a trajectory of further catastrophe. What we saw in Puerto Rico is not an aberration. And I just wanted to say that SUNY is stepping up. One of the first two initiatives as chancellor, we put us on a path, us being SUNY, as the largest higher education system in the country, to procure 100% of our electricity from non-carbon sources as soon as possible. And we put out the first RFP to do phase 1. And all new buildings will be designed to function as zero net carbon buildings going forward. Thank you. And you know, we couldn't do that without having the governor and the legislature behind us, so thank you. It's the collective brain trust in this room that we can develop, again, how to be proactive and anticipate these disasters and be better prepared for them. And since we're all in higher education, we recognize that the mission of the university is to pass on culture to the next generation. And it's exciting to me and to all of us to see so many students involved, because they will be living with and unfortunately experiencing the worst effects of climate change. And as witnessed by their participation in the recovery and rebuilding efforts, I know they are willing and ready to be part of the solution. By participating in RISE 2019, you will come away with ideas to bring back to your campuses and partner organizations about how we can better prepare ourselves and our communities for the impact of natural disasters and the speed and efficiency in which we can rebuild. Together, higher education can strengthen preparedness, response, and recovery efforts in the face of threats posed by a changing climate and extreme weather. I, for one, am looking forward to learning of the actionable outcomes from this conference and what I can do as chancellor to help further your ideas. So again, thank you for attending RISE 2019, for your commitment to our shared responsibility in improving and reducing our global carbon footprint and creating a roadmap that will benefit generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Chancellor Johnson. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jorge Haddock Acevedo, who is the president of the University of Puerto Rico system. The University of Puerto Rico has been a key partner in the SUNY Stands with Puerto Rico initiative. And a year or so ago, SUNY and the University of Puerto Rico signed an MOU to facilitate innovative academic and research collaborations. President, please.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. What a pleasure to be back. And I bring greetings from the community of the University of Puerto Rico. It's a great honor to represent my alma mater at such an important event. And I am pleased to welcome all of you to RISE 2019, Transforming University Engagement in Pre- and Post-Disaster Environments, Lessons from Puerto Rico. I'd like to start by acknowledging two of our own, the co-chairs, Dr. Marla Perez Lugo and Dr. Cecilia Ortiz Garcia. Please stand up again. We can never thank them enough for their work. Marla is back there. So thank you. What a great success already. Hurricane Maria, as has been mentioned, touched touched our island September 20, 2017. And to put things in perspective, as it's been said before, we had never had a hurricane of this magnitude, a disaster of this magnitude for over 80 years. So for most of the people on the island, they had never experienced anything like this. And you can imagine, by the way, in the interest of full disclosure, I was at the University of Massachusetts, Boston at the time. So I could see this from afar, but you can imagine that most of the effort was put into how to prepare for the storm, and not a lot of effort was put into how to recover from the storm. In addition to that, you also, to put things in perspective, we get all these warnings all the time, and they don't always hit. So people were a little bit, and we had been hit 2 weeks before or so. So what are the chances that we're going to be hit again in such magnitude? So we were not prepared for after the disaster. So this opportunity we have here this week in this event, as it's been said also already, is to really start working on not only in the preparation for this type of disasters, but the recovery of the disasters. So at the time you'll be seeing over the next 3 days how it destroyed homes, roads, and bridges, knocked out power across the entire island, and triggered heavy flooding. And more than 2 years after the storm, we're still in a recovery mode in a lot of the island. My in-laws, for example, in their 80s, they had no electricity for over 3 months. And here we're in Boston, not being able to do much for them. The University of Puerto Rico community is very thankful for all the help received from more than 50 alliances with universities that offer help in more ways that you can imagine. And I've been touched and humbled about how many expressions of desire to assist us and to collaborate with us we have received, not only over the past 2 years, but even in the last 2 days that we've been here with you. So we're very thankful for that. We're very humbled by your sincere desire to support the island, even after 2 years later, but especially in being ready in the event that a disaster like this happens again. So quick response to a teaching environment that allow our students to come to the state to finish their semester is just one of the examples in which we got so much support from the universities on the mainland. The humanitarian relief, as has been said before, and so on. So you're going to be hearing about some of the assistance that we have received already, but some of the things that we need to continue to do to be ready for future events. So thank you on behalf of the University of Puerto Rico and the island of Puerto Rico in general. The actions that were a quick response to serve our community with the disaster relief and disaster case management are some of the things that we will continue to discuss over the next three days. Probably the universities that offer the help and the ones that traveled to Puerto Rico didn't know exactly what they were doing in terms of the effect that they were going to have on the people of Puerto Rico in those days and far beyond. Everything has changed on the island. I came a year later to discover an island that has been changed in many ways. The mental health continues to be an issue. There's some of the infrastructure issues that continue to be an issue. But I think more importantly, and perhaps on the positive note, people have to become more entrepreneurial, and certainly the resiliency of the Puerto Ricans came to be showcased because we had to become not only more resilient, but more entrepreneurial. So that's perhaps is the positive side of the storm. To this end, our universities and colleges are extraordinarily well positioned to leverage our research and discovery to the assistance in the teaching and the workforce development and the community and public engagement missions to make a lasting impact on the fight against the impact of this type of disasters. That's why we believe that this RISE 2009 conference will open a national and international forum for excellence that brings together the key decision makers involved in the disaster preparedness of universities of higher education, in the Americas to strengthen response and recovery efforts, exchange experiences, and prepare for the vision of the future for a more sustainable and resilient university. And this is how we come together to help universities manage the response to climate change-related disasters. So I'm looking forward to being with you over the next few hours. I'd like to, before I sit down, I'd like to ask some of the members, key members of our committee to stand up, starting with our provost, Ubaldo Cordova. Please stand up in the back. Our provost and vice president and executive vice president for the university, Ubaldo Cordova. Those of you who wanted to continue to talk about partnerships or to continue to further our partnerships, he is a key person. I'd like to bring to point out our chancellor, Glory V. Rosario. Where is Glory V? Our chancellor, back there. And all the other members of the University of Puerto Rico community, please stand. So please keep on, make sure that you connect with one of them. Please, all of them stand up. University of Puerto Rico community members, please stand up. So for those of you who want to connect with us and do not have a chance to connect with me, given I'm a little bit outnumbered, that's the best joke I have all day, by the way. Those are the key people that you should connect over the next 3 days. So thank you again. Looking forward to spending the day with you.
Presidente Jado Acevedo, muchísimas gracias. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Patricia Fahey. And Patricia Fahey is an assembly member of the New York State Assembly. She represents the 109th Assembly District, which includes the University at Albany. She is a strong and very effective advocate for higher education as well as environmental sustainability initiatives. Pat is really a great friend to UAlbany and higher education. Please welcome Pat to the podium.
Buenos dias. Good morning. Wonderful to be here. What a turnout. What an amazing start. I must start with a congratulations to all of University of Albany for hosting this extraordinary forum and conference, but a special shout out to Javadan Rodriguez, the president. It seems like you've already been here a dozen years. I have to say, you're doing so much. And to the chancellor for always supporting the best of causes, Chancellor Christina Johnson, and all of those who are participating. And a shout out to our governor. I have to say, it has been remarkable what he has done to champion, especially given the vacuum or given the ignoring of the needs of Puerto Rico at the national level from our president. Sorry to be so blunt. It has been truly remarkable and extraordinary that the governor has made sure that the state of New York has not forgotten our friends, our allies, and all of those in Puerto Rico and helping them to really recover. And I don't think we would be as far along if it were not the case. So big shout out, and also another congrats for being appointed the president of the Hispanic Leadership Institute as well. Great choice on the part of the governor. Resiliency. Today is so much about resiliency. It's actually, I think it's one of the most powerful terms that we could use. And I first heard it really in the context of education. A superintendent once said to me, you can't bully a resilient child. Well, it applies to certainly climate change, to building resiliency, but it applies to each of us as well. These are discouraging times. I just happened to get a flyer over the weekend, knowing I was coming here, a flyer from the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF, and they've said, in the face of danger, the dawn of hope. Face of danger, dawn of hope. In order to keep that hope, we all have to practice resiliency while we look at practicing it for the environment and preparing the environment. And just on that note, I just have to say, No community, while we're here to talk a lot about Puerto Rico, to talk a lot about some of the disasters around this country, I will say no community, no country, no state has been exempt from what we are seeing with weather-related disasters. Alaska hit 90 degrees for the first time just in the past year. Greenland lost 250 billion tons of ice. The Amazon rainforest had fires in 2 million acres. Obviously, the American Midwest, throughout upstate New York, we have seen flooding and the consequences of flooding. And then hurricanes. I don't need to name them. There's many, again, just this year, including Hurricane Dorian. And then California. Has any fire stopped burning there? And the earliest start ever to their fire season. So we know we have challenges. We have challenges throughout. We need an absolute multi-pronged attack in order to solve these issues, and I believe we can do it. I believe that you and conferences are like this are going to be at the front end of that and must lead the way, whether it is energy related, energy and the environment, whether it's transportation, whether it's tackling plastics, you name it. We need to recognize that it's not just pay now or pay later. The term is really we invest now. We invest or we pay later, and I get how hard that is. Many of you are in academia. Yes, I'm in politics, but we need your pressure to stay on us because it's 2019, and New York State just banned plastic bags earlier this year. Now, I'm really proud we've done it, but it took a lot of political will and political pressure to just ban plastic bags. I'm hoping we keep going, and I've got a few bills to keep banning more plastics. But the point is, it does take tremendous political will, especially to give the attention to our environmental justice communities, like right here in my backyard in Albany, but also in communities like Puerto Rico. There is so much we can do. Again, I think we all need to be future focused. I'll be back here on Friday. For those of you that want to extend your stay, I'll be back here on Friday for an artificial intelligence forum that we are doing here with the cooperation of President Rodriguez. And artificial intelligence, we're theming it, what is the future with artificial intelligence in addressing climate change, clean energy, and cybersecurity. They're all related, and it all moves in the same direction as what you're talking about here over the next few days. So please keep holding our feet to the fire. That's a very poor pun, and it was not intended. But I do believe we will rise together. This is an appropriately named conference. We will rise together, but we must be resilient together, and we must tackle this in every way in our own lives, let alone in the policies and the recommendations that we make coming forward out of this conference. So it is an honor to represent this university, an honor to work with so many of you, and again, a very heartfelt welcome to each of you. What you are doing matters. It matters for the future of this community, this country, and this world. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And our next speaker certainly needs no further introduction. The co-chair of RISE 2019, el Dr. Cecilio Ortiz Garcia.
Buenos días. Good morning. What an honor to be sharing this great space. No barriers. The walls are all the way to the side. All just human beings in the middle of it. Since last night at the conference, we have been listening to presidents demonstrate themselves what leadership is all about. Yesterday, the president of the University of Minnesota told us at the Young Conference about the grand challenges that that university has set out to tackle and conquer. Later on the night, I had the chance to speak to the dean of the School of Social Welfare here. And she also talked to me about the grand challenges that the field of social work is looking to tackle. And I wanted to ask you, as I say the word grand challenges, what things come to mind? What do you think these people told me that were the grand challenges for their universities and their disciplines? I'll tell you a few, and you tell me if you agree with your hand, okay? Water. Ooh, that's nice. Energy. That's even nicer. Poverty. Homelessness. Amazing. We have an amazing capacity as academics to compartmentalize, fragment, specialize, order, and set out to conquer the world. And we have been doing it for a long time. RISE is a recognition of that, but not as a pat in the back, but as a critical reflection. We have found a way to fragment ourselves disciplinarily. We are now thinking of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity as ways to deal with that initial organizational structure. We have found a way to now look at wicked problems and say, no, we should be concentrating on issues. So the issues that you hear as grand challenges have taken the spotlight, but we didn't undo the initial fragmentation. We just threw some more at it. And here we go. And disasters are around us every day. From a child that is killed by a shooter in a neighborhood to a wildfire in Sonoma. And we have managed to lose track of the most important technological tool to help us move forward, and that is relationships. We have forgotten that no matter how much science we throw at these wicked issues, if the proper relationships are not there to support the sustainability of those efforts, we are not going anywhere. So, what is RISE? It's not an acronym. Sorry to disappoint. RISE is a paradigmatic change in the way we relate to each other and the way we relate to our communities in our own backyards. RISE is a paradigmatic change because it actually wants us to look at communities to understand what resiliency means. They are showing us every day in neighborhoods in Raleigh-Durham, in neighborhoods in Mariana, Puerto Rico, en Humacao, in neighborhoods in Duluth, Minnesota, and in neighborhoods in Albany, New York. They've been endowed with resilience from birth. And we're looking to construct resilience? What tools do we need to develop? What are the grand challenges? I challenge you to think that it's not energy. It's not energy transitions. It's not coastal resilience. No. It's to be able to, in a fragmented world, in a polarized political world like we are living right now in this country, to be able to bring about two ideologies together and move forward on a path towards sustainability. That is a grand challenge. We have managed to do great things through STEM. In this room, I can count technological innovations from the University of Washington and Oregon State all the way down to UCF, and they're all here. We are all here. I just want you to ask yourself for the next 3 days, what can we do differently? Is it a STEM problem? Or is it a social science problem? Or is it a humanities problem? Let's reflect on the constant fragmentation in a world of the Anthropocene where resiliency is the governance of uncertainty. And let's turn it around. Let's listen to our communities about what resiliency is, how we can better organize to collaborate and not help, to humbly treat them as repositories of non-scientific knowledge and a lot of wisdom. Let's reorganize ourselves in a platform that will have your back in your community when you get hit like I was hit. Wouldn't you like to become a part of a community like that? That is the objective of this conference, to develop community in this room. That is our grand challenge, and that is the challenge that RISE is here to tackle on. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for accepting this humble invitation to join us in this quest for paradigmatic change within academia and along all sectors and all stakeholders that live with us in our landscapes of risk.
Excuse me, sorry. Thank you very much, Cecilia. Very, very well said. It is only fitting that we conclude this section this morning with someone and an organization that has been instrumental to the success, to the emergence and success of RISE 2019. Michelle Wyman is the Executive Director of the National Council for Science and Environment. Michelle and NCSC are lead partner for RISE 2019, and we greatly appreciate her leadership and commitment to RISE 2019. Michelle, please join us at the podium.
Good morning, buenos dias. I just leaned over to my esteemed colleague Cecilio and said, "Why am I speaking after you?" So I invite all of you to share a bit of kindness with me this morning as I wrap up the opening session of RISE 2019. I know we have extended a lot of gratitude on this stage already. I'm going to do it one more time because, as Cecilio noted, community matters, relationships matter, and ultimately the human factor is such a strong determinant, if not the determinant, in successful outcomes. So thank you, President Rodriguez. Thank you so much in the University at Albany for supporting us, for hosting us, for partnering with us to have this event. We're so grateful. Thank you, Chancellor Johnson and the entire SUNY system. We look forward to continuing this work. Thank you, Jim Diaz and Vince Delio and the entire team here who have worked tirelessly to make RISE 2019 happen. And thank all of you who have journeyed here. I heard a number of times, and I mean no offense to any of you that are here in upstate New York at Albany, that November might not be the ideal time for an Albany destination. So thank you for making the journey from wherever you've come, particularly if it's a bit warmer there. I wanted to share briefly a bit about the organization that I have the privilege of working for, the National Council for Science and the Environment. The mission of our organization is to improve the scientific basis of environmental decision making. And I'm going to say it again. It's simple to say, and it's really hard to do, to improve the scientific basis of environmental decision making. It gets even trickier when you do this in a nonpartisan way. What does that mean? That means that NCSE, together with the community that we have the privilege of working with, deans and directors across the science enterprise from universities all over the country and increasingly all over the world, we stand strongly together behind science's truth, scientific integrity, on the issues that our world, our societies, the environment, and the planet as we know it face today. When someone calls me and says, Michelle, do you believe in climate change? I say, I believe in climate science. I think the opportunity we have together right now is to take into account everything that we've already heard this morning and to stack that up and understand not only what's at risk, but what's possible. This year alone, by September, 7 million people in the world were displaced by extreme weather events. Displaced, climate refugees. And how will we respond to that going forward? It will not only be an academic response, it will not only be a scientific response, nor a university response. It will be a community response, a human response. And so with that, I want to share one very, very personal story, which takes us all as we move out of this room and into sessions to a place of understanding of what's possible with just two human beings when they choose to be responsive. So forgive me, Cecilio and Marla, but I'm going to tell a bit of a personal story about the two of you. Right after Maria hit in September of 2017, before I even knew you, but I heard this a little bit later after I met you, you were standing in your house, fielding calls from allies, friends, community, people all over the world offering help, and trying to figure out in a very real way how you were going to make dinner for Sophia, where you would charge your cell phone, and how, in the good way that you do with your good nature, to say thank you so much for the offer of help. We do need reconstruction supplies. We do need food and water on the island. We don't know how to accept it. We don't know how, as academics, part of a university system, we can activate a response that takes advantage of all this help, that engages with our community, with Mayaguez, with the cities on the island. And as you can see through the different words you're hearing on stage, RISE means something different to every single person. For those of us that have been involved since the beginning, RISE for NCSE is actively looking for a way to take the science that you all are working on and sharing and making it accessible with the local governments that are first responders and can benefit so much from the evidence, the knowledge, the data, and the analysis that you provide, and to help those local governments, those communities, those states and regions understand that the university constellation can be an organized response mechanism immediately after disasters, during disasters, and also in the readiness process. Because keep in mind, with every extreme weather event, we learn not only what worked, but a whole lot of what we didn't know to know. And how do we unpack that? How do we explore it, learn from it, and then apply it next time around? The community that we are creating and will continue to grow with your help, your leadership, your time, and your expertise, and your hearts through RISE, we hope will be double, triple, and at some point not able to even be held in this building. This is our opportunity as a university community to be inclusive, to reach out to city halls, to county seats, to state houses, and all the way upstream beyond, even when it feels like we're not invited. Remember the human factor and the spirit that we all bring to this work. I look forward to talking with you all, to working with you over the next 3 days and beyond. Thank you again so much for having us.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And as you can see, this has been a truly extraordinary showcase of leadership, commitment, compassion, and passion, and expertise as we begin the conference. As you have seen, this has been truly a community and a collaborative effort. Thank you all for being part of this historical gathering here at the University at Albany. We are honored and thankful that you are with us here today. Muchísimas gracias. And now it is my pleasure as we transition to our next session to introduce Dr. Robert Griffin. Dr. Griffin has not only incredible expertise as a former administrator in U.S. Department of Homeland Security, but he is also the Dean of UAlbany's First in the Nation College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity. In addition to serving on the SUNY Puerto Rico Task Force, his college has also been deeply engaged in the recovery efforts in Puerto Rico, sending students, faculty, and staff to multiple missions. Dr. Griffin will moderate our President's Roundtable today, so please help me welcome Dr. Griffin to the podium. Thank you so very much.
Our lives. That's why this event is so incredibly important. And that's why we all need your best thinking for the next 3 days. And if at any point in time you say, wow, I really wish I was doing something different, think about your kids, think about your grandkids, and think about your great-grandkids. There is no community, let me say that again, there is no community that will not be impacted by climate change. This is a global phenomenon, and it is negative in almost every aspect of the word. So as you start to think about today, when you start to think about the power of the academy, when you start to think about the power of research and development, when you start to think about what we can do collectively, we are talking about saving the world. No pressure on a Monday morning. Let me bring the panel up. It is my honor to introduce Javadán Rodriguez, the president of the University at Albany. It is my pleasure to introduce Jorge Jado Acevedo, president of the University of Puerto Rico. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jenny Evans, President of the American Meteorological Society. And it is my pleasure to introduce Vince Boudreau, President of the City College of New York. Finally, I would just like to ask for a round of applause for a group of people who I think have been doing yeoman's work and are not recognized. To our federal partners in the science and technology areas who are continuing to bring good science to our policymakers in a time when sometimes good science isn't appreciated. We know what we're doing, we stand behind you, and we stand with you. Could we give a round of applause to a group of people who have had a really tough couple years? Keep up the good work, everybody. President Rodriguez, we could start with you. Could you make a few comments about today's challenges, the opportunities of academia, thinking about workforce development and research?
Thank you so much, Bob, and again, thank you all for being here today. And I think that institutions of higher education can and should play a critical role in forming partnerships with our communities as we focus on issues of disaster mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, and especially sustainability. And we need to continue to work collaboratively to reduce vulnerability to disasters while strengthening community resiliency and sustainability. And we have a major responsibility here in educating future generations of leaders and decision makers. And we can think about the amazing work that institutions of higher education are already doing. You can think about the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, Cybersecurity at the University at Albany, or maybe the pioneering work that's taking place at the Disaster Research Center at the University of Delaware? Or how about the research work and contributions of the Natural Hazard Center at the University of Colorado, Boulder? Or how about the emerging work in disasters at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley? Or the excellent work taking place at the Puerto Rico Research Hub at the University of Central Florida? Clearly, there's a lot of work going on across the country focusing on these critical and important issues. And I do know that one of the goals of RISE is to challenge the status quo and challenge institutions of higher education to think differently in terms of how we engage in disaster response, how we engage in issues related to vulnerability and sustainability with a focus on social justice. I think this is critically important that we do challenge the status quo, but that said, it is also important that we take into account the critical and the strong foundations that have already been built by institutions of higher education in this process. And so using professional verbiage, right, and I quote, let's make sure we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? So let's build on those strong foundations. Now, what happens when events such as Hurricane Maria happen? How do institutions of higher education respond? Well, we have some great examples in terms of how SUNY and CUNY and the University of Minnesota, Arizona State, the University of Central Florida, among others, responded to these events. But now imagine for a minute if this work was well coordinated and well managed across institutions such as those here today. Also, imagine for a minute if we actually establish a consortium of institutions that could work together, collaborate, coordinate, and share resources to respond in an organized fashion to these events. The impact and outcomes could be quite amazing and would significantly and positively impact communities that experience the consequence of these devastating events. So let me challenge you as well to think as how we can come together, separating the institutional boundaries, separating the college and school boundaries, separating the department and the philosophical boundaries that separate us. And let's think about reducing or mitigating vulnerability, preparing to respond to these events in coordinated fashions with a clear focus on the critical issues that impact these communities. But let's also, as a disaster happens and we say pack your bags, let's go do research, let's say in Puerto Rico, and let's provide service. We must educate our faculty, our staff, our students in the context to which we are responding. For example, in the case of Puerto Rico, there was already a pre-existing economic crisis. The healthcare system was already being deteriorated. Migration was already at an all-time high. Hurricane Maria didn't create these situations. This was the result of the social, political, cultural context in which these events occur, and we as institutions of higher education have a moral responsibility and an imperative to understand these situations no matter our best intentions. So let me just leave it there for now.
Thank you so much. President Acevedo?
Sure. Is this working? So I do have some slides. Are they ready? Do we have the slides ready? I'm going to have plan B, which is to look at the slides on my iPhone, so please bear with me while we well, I'm going to start by saying, while I figure this out, how could you add to what he already said, President Rodriguez? It's difficult to add, and I think that I like to start with his last words, which is, I think, I'm going to present some of the science behind it, and I'm going to present some of the, are we ready? I'm going to present some of the science and some of the facts, but I think ultimately it's about the moral imperative. It can't be all about facts and the economics, because at the end of the day, when you think about plastics, economics say that plastics is the way to go. But look at the damage that it's doing to the environment and to the world. So I think that I'm going to talk in the context of lessons from Puerto Rico in terms of the engagement, what is going to take to present a cohesive policy and what is going to work. So I'm going to start with as we get this done, I'm going to start from the back. I'm an operations researcher, and we usually start from the solution and then we come back, right? I think that our challenge that we have is how we can create these partnerships between the university, the private companies, and government. Because you think about this, it's going to be difficult for any of these sectors to have a solution by themselves. I think that is going to take the universities to do the cutting-edge research. It's going to take the private companies to obviously to do the commercialization, and then it's going to take the government to create the infrastructure and the policy to make it all cohesive and happen and make it happen. I can think about when I lived in Richmond, Virginia. Virginia is the only state where you have the counties. Cities are not part of the counties. So when I lived in Richmond, an example that could offend the least number of people would be in Richmond we had a difficulty creating a mass transportation system. So we had a difficulty in Richmond having a cohesive transportation system because we were surrounded by 3 counties and the city was not connected with any of those counties. So when you had the 3 counties working independently, we had a difficulty creating a mass transportation system for for Richmond. So I think here what we have is a similar situation where you have the universities and the private companies and the government having to work together when we have different metrics and when we're measured differently. So when you think about Maria, you're going to see in the slides if we get to them. If not, we'll move on, and I'm sure that people, we're talking about compassion and forgiveness. This would be a moment to have compassion and forgiveness.
Although if you want to know real stress, the poor IT guy right now is really freaking out. So if you give him a hug when he comes in, he's definitely going to need it. Sorry, continue, sir.
That's okay. So what you're going to see is as President Haviland said, we had an island, Rodriguez said, we had an island who was already in some financial crisis and some emigration, and it was hit by the worst storm in over 80 years. And so it was a catalyst for the situation that we're experiencing today. So you're going to see how the island suffered with no electricity in some parts of the island for a year. And even today, 2 years later, there are parts of the island that don't have the adequate infrastructure. And then you're going to see how the slides were trying to make the point that we on the island, we have all the elements for all these renewable energies, all of them. When you think about the wind that is in the Caribbean, the wind is perfect. There's very few places in the world that has the wind energy that we have in the Caribbean. When you think about the solar energy, we're hoping to be on the island right now. Many of us wish to be on the island, right? Because we have all this solar energy. And we have all the perfect, the coastline and the hydro that is not only on the coast. So we have all the elements for all the renewable energies. And what we are making the point is that the island could really be a hub and a test bed for all the renewable energies, not only for the island, but for the rest of the world, because we have all those perfect elements on the island. And as an experiment, we talked about building a community. As an experiment, we can not only have the island be a test bed on its own, but we could also start with the Virgin Islands and create a hub with the Virgin Islands, which is part of the U.S. if we're thinking about funding. And we can create a hub for all these energies as a test bed with the Virgin Islands. And actually, we started to do one of the first collaboration with the Virgin Islands, with the University of Virgin Islands. That my only question is, how come we didn't do this before? So that we could do more collaboration with the Virgin Islands as a test bed. So I'm going to finish by saying, in the argument that we're going to make is that. As I said, I'm going to finish with the way I started. And as President Rodriguez said, he's going to take the collaboration between all these sectors. And the challenge will be, how are we going to have this collaboration when the metrics are so different and there is nothing at stake for us to work together? Perhaps it's about the community then making these demands from us to come and work together and become that, and have that become one of the metrics by which we are all measured. So I'm going to leave you with that, and then you're going to see the slides available to you somehow. So thank you for your compassion and forgiveness.
And we will make sure that the slides are on the website, so you can all see that. President Evans?
Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm going to take slightly a different tack and let you know how I came to be in this room and why. How I see what we're doing here today is absolutely crucial. So I'm a president of the American Meteorological Society. I'm the director of Penn State's Institute for Computational and Data Sciences, and I'm professor of meteorology and atmospheric science, specializing in hurricanes and climate change. So my research, I think, the motivation is pretty clear why we're here today. Events such as Maria just tend to galvanize you even more in needing what you do to be critical and important. As a professor, many of you, most of you will know that your students demand relevance, that they demand the ability to change the world, and that they're pushing us to change the education we give them. And we heard this morning about incredible work that SUNY and CUNY students were doing along those lines and being enabled by their universities. As director of the Institute for Computational and Data Sciences, it's a mouthful, but it's important. If you think about trying to address any of the kinds of challenges that we're talking about here, these incredibly all-encompassing disasters, you need to bring together an incredible number of people and an incredible amount of data to make that happen, and to process that information meaningfully to make it actionable. Okay, and like it or not, these days, the kinds of tools that come up in computational and data sciences are part of that process. So I think why I'm here today is as president of the American Meteorological Society. That's the only way I fit in with all of these esteemed colleagues. And I don't know how many of you know much about the AMS, the American Meteorological Society. but we have members everywhere from theoretical researchers sitting in the ivory tower maybe, all the way to people on the ground, to the broadcasters, forecasters, emergency managers, and so on. And so in that way, we're different from many other societies because we really run the full gamut from the fundamental equations to people. And we are also the core professionals when you see a weather, water, or climate-related disaster. We really need to take responsibility and to be part of that discussion and that action. And of course, you've seen many times where these professionals do this. And since so many of you are from Puerto Rico, you probably know Ada Monzon. So Ada is an AMS fellow as of 2018. And having heard her speak a few times, if you want to think about why what we're doing in this room is important, listen to Ada talk about Maria. It'll bring you to tears. And it did. And then it'll strengthen your resolve. So when we're doing this, we recognize what we can do and what we need to reach out to other people to do. And we need the insights and wisdom from people who are on the ground. One of the things that we've recognized in the AMS is that we need to know what we don't know. Okay, and if you don't have a sufficiently diverse group of people thinking about it, you don't know issues around the geography, around customs, around whatever. As a teenager, I went to the city of Adelaide. I'm from Australia. And I grew up in Melbourne, and I went to Adelaide, and I noticed all of these Indigenous Australians. And I hadn't noticed the lack of them in the city I grew up in. I had to be aware that there was a lack, and I found that out by going somewhere else. So I'm going a very circuitous route here, but I think what Cecilia said this morning kind of is the sort of thing I'm feeding back to you today, and I think it is critical to what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. So I think I'll leave you with that.
Thank you so much.
I want to start by thanking you for getting choked up. That's usually my job, but I feel a tremendous burden has been lifted sitting next to you. Dr. Garcia, I was really thrilled to hear you talk about provoking a paradigm shift, because the remarks I had prepared, starting with the role of the president on a university and a college campus, were sort of directed towards that, because I think that's what we need. About 20 years ago, when I was just beginning to stop thinking about, what my lecture had to be on Monday and what I was going to put on the midterm exam, and started thinking about the place of the college and the university in our public life, someone came to me and said, there was a time in our public life where when we faced the deepest, most desperate challenges, we went to the universities and we asked them to set aside their routine business and convene conversations on which the future of our society depended. And that person said to me, over these last 20 or 30 years, a lot of those conversations have been displaced by talking heads on cable television, by internet blogs with no real authority, scientific or otherwise, behind them. And I take the gathering in this room to be an affirmation that we as a collective want to get back to those days where the people in these rooms and people like us are getting together, setting aside our routine business and saying, if this is indeed an existential challenge to our globe, to our species, then it becomes the most important thing that we can do. And so let me start by saying what I think that we as presidents can do, which is, and this may seem simple, I think we need on our campuses to make a declaration that says, whatever brought you to our campus, whether it is a love for English literature or meteorology or microbiology, whatever your disciplinary specificity is, this is a moment to rise above that and say, as an institution, we must meet the challenges of the day. On my campus this year, we declared a year of environmental sustainability and social justice, and that very act put people in a room who hadn't talked to each other, weren't fully aware of one another's existence on our campus. And what that has done, I think, is allowed us in a number of different rooms to set aside some of the fragmentation that bedevils us. And we haven't solved it, we're working on it, but we have, I think, a path forward. And so let me just talk about the ways in which that simple declaration has opened a path for deeper and more fruitful conversation. And the first is fairly obvious. I suspect we'll be hearing a great deal about interdisciplinarity over these days. But if you think about what we need to rise to the challenge of protecting our people and our planet against the threats of climate change, we need to break down at least 3 different ways of approaching the question. We need to take climate science and engineering, the technology that mediates the relationship between what happens in the natural world and human life, and social science and the humanities, how we come to understand the impact of these things. We've got to bring those together. And that seems like you can do it just by saying you want to do it, but it's not true. You sit engineers and social scientists in a room, and the first thing you realize is they don't actually know how to talk to one another without doing it for a very, very long time. On my campus, we started this year a Climate Fellows program. And it's built around a very simple premise, and it's unbelievable that it's necessary, which is that engineers and scientists and people with economics training need to know one another's work. And if you look across not just the academic world, but the policy world, the extent to which economics takes place without any cognizance of climate science, and climate science proposes changes without any sense of what the economic reality on their own. It's astounding that these conversations haven't taken place. We also have in our engineering school work that began in Puerto Rico on things like coastal resiliency and flood control, now moving into areas of how do you coordinate the various agencies responsible for responding. Right? So you have engineers moving into policy studies. So that's the first and I think the most, the easiest to apprehend of these boundaries that needs to be broken down. The second, though, is in modalities of our work. I suspect as we talk more and more about building relationships, one of the first things we'll settle on is the need for pedagogies like service learning to come in and so to help us build relationships with communities in service learning. But they're all different kinds of ways of engaging with communities. And if you ask academics to develop in one of these ways, you will get you'll get the people that are thinking about teaching rather than other things. Service learning, community-based participatory research, public scholarship, how we teach, how we do and define our research, and how we talk to public audiences all have to be integrated across a pedagogy of engagement. And far too often, these are broken down into different sections on campus. Our approach to our resources. Very, very often when we think about what the resources we have on campus in the face of a disaster, the first thing we think about is labor. Now, we've done wonderful things in CUNY and SUNY in sending 500 students a year down to Puerto Rico to do some of the reconstruction work. But we should also think about our institutional resources. We heard this marvelous story of SUNY's ship. I remember in 2001 when I was on the campus of City College during 9/11, the very first thing we did is put cots and water in our gym to try to make sure people had a place to go. And you know what? Nobody came. Nobody came. We didn't understand that the thing we were prepared to do institutionally wasn't the need of the city. Our city, we didn't understand what the needs were. And so making sure that as we deploy our institutional resources, we're not inventing what that deployment looks like in the moment of disaster. We're thinking about it ahead of time. But then even more deeply, what our research capacities are. How we begin to think about our institutions as a place where policymakers and journalists and populations should come to learn about what you should do in time of a disaster. And then I think, finally, just to kind of move the agenda, I think our definition of community needs to evolve or at least undergo a kind of critical reexamination. Our easiest definition are the people who are in our backyard, right? My campus is in Harlem, and so not surprisingly, one of the leading elements of our research in climate science is climate science in the urban environment. And we do a lot of work in that area. But we should also start thinking about ourselves as an increasingly networked society. In my field in political science, we used to talk about hard power, which was guns and bombs. Then we talked about soft power, which was the ability to influence. And more recently, people have been talking about network power, which means the power you get when people travel from all over the world, live at your institution, and then go back. And then you have those bridges between a University of Albany or a city college and Puerto Rico and other places in the world. And so our community becomes defined by the people, faculty, staff, students who inhabit our campuses and the knowledge and the commitments that they bring by virtue of living between two societies. And finally, I think, as part of that declaration that I am urging us to make as institutions, we have to think about ourselves as existing explicitly in a moral community. A community where if you are not looking at the sites of disaster and feeling that those are the people who are your brothers and sisters, then you are missing the challenge of the day. And we have to make a reaffirmation of that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. So, wonderful comments for everybody except the moderator, because you hit all of my questions. So let me paraphrase a slightly different question than I gave you. How do and what is the role of the academy? And I say academy not just because of universities and colleges, but also the research community. What is our role in preparing for and implementing high-impact, locally relevant approaches to communities? And this plays off a theme that I heard from each one of the panelists. And for the good of the audience, if you have specific examples that you could point to say, wow, this is something that we do which really works well, or this is something that's aspirational but I think could work great, as a way of sort of priming some thought process. Anybody like to start?
All right, so we think about some of the parts of the world where this has been extremely successful. Think about the Silicon Valley, think about Boston and some of the cities. And one of the elements that we have in common is great universities doing great research that is relevant to basic science, but it takes the basic science all the way to commercialization. And then it also creates this entrepreneurship ecosystem that brings the investors, the angel investors, and all the sectors to that hub of the world. I think that one of the things that we have to have as universities, on the other hand, is, and I'm starting to sound like an economist, on the other hand is that we need to focus on what we could do best, rather than trying to be all things to all people and to be too expensive. So I think that the value that we bring is, again, generate the ideas, generate the science, bring it to a level where it can be commercialized, create that ecosystem of entrepreneurship and hand it off to private industry or the government.
President Rico.
I mean, I think we also have to be better at communicating what we're doing. You know, we so much of the research we do, especially the scientific and technological research, happens inside a community where we assume that the people who need to know about this research are people who are engaged in it or will be the direct beneficiaries of it. And this cuts a number of ways. If we have researchers in place doing research. They have to be both community organizers and researchers. You know, they have to make sure that if you are working in a coastal community, and let's say the work is utterly technical, you've still got to get out in that community, learn the context, develop the allegiances with people in the community for a number of reasons. First of all, if you're going to propagate that research broadly, you need to know about the relationship between the science and the social context. This is what we heard from President Rodriguez at the start of this panel. You also want to be able to develop that skill of talking about what's important in something that may be utterly technical to people that don't have that technological background. And so, again, I think bringing a capacity and an interest in communicating, building relationships is essential to this work.
So something else I think we've touched on is the need for communication. And so in the institute I run, we have everyone from nanomaterials to exoplanets. So what the materials guys say is small, what I say is small, and what the planetary scientists say is incredibly different. So we sit down at the table and we already have a language problem on a word that you think you understand. And so getting people from all the different disciplines who need to be thinking about this, including the economists, psychologists, whomever, and understanding each other's language well enough to be able to ask a question that you'll get the answer you want, I think is critical to doing this well. And then taking that out and trying to understand the need, again, in the language where you get the answer that you're trying to achieve.
President Rodriguez?
And I think you asked about a concrete example, and you already have heard this, but let me just reiterate it, because how do you define the role of an institution of higher education in a time of crises? And how do we take the leadership role in working with communities that have been impacted, and in the case of Puerto Rico, devastated by these events? And I think the example here in the state of New York, when you have the governor of the state saying, this is critically important for us as a state, right? New York stands with Puerto Rico. And when you have the chancellor of the SUNY system, and when you have the chancellor of the CUNY system saying, we have to come together as institutions of higher education to work collaboratively to help the people in Puerto Rico recover from this devastating event. The mere fact that, for example, in the SUNY system, we have 64 institutions in SUNY, that you had 34 institutions actively engaging faculty, staff, and students in responding to the issues that were impacting Puerto Rico. And you had over 1,000 students sent by SUNY and over 500 students sent by CUNY to Puerto Rico. This shows how institutions of higher education can take the leadership role, how we can break those barriers, how we can distinguish the importance of these types of issues and the moral imperative that we have as institutions of higher education to do this. So when you look at the response across the country, really you don't see a comprehensive response by two university systems as you saw here in the state of New York. And I think that speaks highly of what we can accomplish together as institutions of higher education. But that requires leadership from the very top, but engagement with our faculty, our staff, our students, and our community members.
Thank you. So we're starting to hear some really interesting themes that we need to come back to. Issues of leadership, issues of communications, issues of research and development. Let's talk about research for a second, if we could. How do we start to think differently about our basic and applied research? And certainly I would argue that there's a third category of operationalized research. How do we take the research that's being done in these great facilities represented here in the audience and bring it to the field to make a difference in operations? Who would like to start?
All right, so it seems like I'm being the first, how you saying, the first batter. But anyway, I think that one of the things that I recommend we start doing in higher education is that we have to have our research based on our mission. We cannot all have, at the university level, we cannot all have the same type of metrics for the research. So when I was at Rensselaer, which I'm very proud of, upstate New York, I spent most of my life at Rensselaer. I remember we used to say, we want the researcher who's going to win the Nobel Prize. Great, so let's have that researcher at that type of institution. But if you, and I obviously I see the value of that. I spent most of my life in that environment, and I think that we need that type of environment. But do we need that type of environment at every university? I think that's what we have to start thinking about. Because when you think about some of the papers that I wrote, that'll be just the end of the research, was the paper that I wrote. You'll never get anywhere else. So I think that we need to start looking at metrics at different types of universities based on the mission of the university. And at the University of Puerto Rico, for example, we have now the ability, our faculty had the ability to do that type of research and to be rewarded by that type of basic research, but also by the applied research that you mentioned. And they get rewarded either way. We don't have to be looking for the researcher who wants to win the Nobel Prize, but the researcher who wants to do the research that could be commercialized and could make a difference in the world. So I think that, again, in summary, I think it's about really not trying all to be Harvard, just to pick a university, or RPI, where I spend my career, but to look at what is our mission depending on the university, and then have the research be valued by that, which, by the way, is one of the requirements for accreditation. So I will start with that as an icebreaker.
So I would say that we have many very large universities represented here, and within those we should also be flexible. I agree that different universities have major missions, but I think we want to be able to reward our young faculty even who are going out and working with industry and innovating, and our faculty who are working truly across disciplines and trying to create maybe new disciplines or do things in a completely new way and innovate. So they're not going to be rewarded with tenure for number of papers published and number of students graduated necessarily. So we need to think about the metrics, even within the universities that we sit in, that are relevant and that still demand excellence and still demand high intellectual capabilities, but do them in a way that acknowledges very many different missions.
Yeah, because you're really talking about a fundamental change for some people in how research is done in the academy.
I mean, I have two responses to this, and one is, I think we should recognize the opportunity that disaster preparedness and climate change offers us to reformate research broadly conceived. You're probably not going to need broad popular participation in an effort to, discover a new subatomic particle, right? You're probably not going to need that kind of participation for biomedical research, but you absolutely do in climate science. There's almost nothing that we can come up with in the area of resilience and disaster preparedness that doesn't require the mobilization of large sections of our population. And so thinking about that, thinking about the opportunity to take the very best science and engineering that we have and figuring out how you can get my grandmother to say, okay, I'm on board, what can I do? That's really what we're talking about. And if you think about that as a necessity of executing this specific mission, it becomes an invitation to reformat science, broadly speaking, so that it's not just climate policy that's being informed by science, it's all policy that's being informed by science. I was speaking to a young man who's a graduate student in our engineering school, and as I said earlier, one of our areas of emphasis is urban sustainability, and one very, very small element of that is we have put around Upper Manhattan these very, very small sensors. You almost would miss them. And what they're looking for is to look for pockets of heat during hot weather events. Because if you've got a senior citizen in an unair-conditioned apartment and 3 floors up it's 10 degrees hotter than on the ground, that's a person that's in danger. So this young man was out in the community putting these little sensors up, and a couple of guys about his age, 18, 19, 20, said, "What are you doing?" And he was a little intimidated because he wasn't from the neighborhood. This was, and he sat down and explained it to these guys. And the four of them that first approached him called some other people over. And pretty soon, this young man was doing a colloquium on the importance of climate science to a bunch of kids that were, between 17 and 18-year-olds on the street in Harlem. And they walked away with a sense of the importance of science in their community. And that's, for me, that's a model of how we should be propagating science, at least on the ground. The necessity of mobilizing people is just too important to overlook.
So if I give you some brochures, will they take them to recruit for CEHC at Albany?
Absolutely.
That sounds great.
Absolutely. We'll take what you got.
So let me highlight three fundamental issues which I think are critical as we continue to define and re-examine research in the area of disasters. I think when we think about disasters and we think about issues of vulnerability, of resiliency and sustainability, we're really focusing on social justice issues, right? And so we need to refocus our attention to these issues, because at the end of the day, disasters don't create homelessness, disasters don't create poverty, disasters don't create inequality, right? Those are pre-existing factors that exacerbate the impact of disasters in communities. So we're going to have to reframe our thoughts around our research on disasters regarding the social justice aspects of disasters. Number two, we're going to have to start, as I said in my initial comments, continue to break down the bridges, the disciplinary bridges that separate us as we think about disasters. So transdisciplinary research is critically important. When I engaged in disaster research 25 years ago, it was really because of an invitation of a group of engineers at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, and most of my research on the socioeconomic impacts of disasters has been with engineers, right? And so I think that provides us a better understanding. And as we develop finally our research enterprise, and this has already been mentioned, the critical importance of engaging our students, our future leaders, our decision makers in terms of responding to, engaging, preparing for disasters. This is critically important. So using research internships, service learning opportunities for our students is going to be critically important as we continue to evolve in the research field, both at the graduate and at the undergraduate level.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the audience, how many of you are from the response community? Could you just raise your hands? Do me a favor, look at the hands that are up, and part of the conversation needs to be not only what research we're doing, but what research that you need in order to be better at your jobs. And that's sort of that cross discussion that we really need. President Rodriguez, you just raised the issue of workforce development and what we do with our students. Can you talk a little bit about some ideas and thoughts that you have about what the university needs to do moving forward? What's the academy need to do moving forward in order to start to train a very different generation of leaders in this area?
So we have, as you all know, right, needless to say, we have a critically important academic mission and research mission as institutions of higher education. But I think we also need, again, talking about breaking down boundaries. We need greater connections with our community organizations, with our first responder agencies and organizations. By the way, also recognizing that the first responders are really every single person that's in this room, right? So that, and particularly when you have a major disaster such as the one in Puerto Rico, we are, each of us as individuals are also first responders in this context. But working very closely with community organizations, with state organizations, with private foundations, and with other types of agencies at the local, state, federal level to do exactly what you say. What are the needs that are out there that we need to continue to educate our student population in order to respond to those workforce development needs? I know sometimes we as institutions of higher education, we stand in the ivory tower and we say, we're here to educate. We're not here to train a labor force. We're not here to deal with the corporate agencies. But we are. We're here to respond to the needs of society. We're here to ensure that we are meeting the critical needs that impact our communities locally and globally. So we do have a moral imperative to identify what are those needs. What are the needs of the first responder agencies as we train our students and educate our students in the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity, and how can we prepare those decision makers that are going to be the first responders as we continue to move forward.
Any of the panelists like to talk about workforce development or thoughts you have on student development in these evolving areas?
So students get a huge amount of education and grounding in the university system, but I would say that academia or their development should also extend out into the professional societies, for example, where they get a different combination of people, a different mix of ideas, and another way to develop themselves as professionals. So I would include that as part of the academic training.
Excellent, thank you.
I mean, I have no doubt but that a student who approaches, her education as a mission to accomplish something in the world is going to have greater student success attainment than somebody who's merely seeking a degree. Right? I don't think anybody, or very few people, go to college with the mission to become a sociologist. And I think, but that said, I guarantee that most of us teach at institutions that is filled with students who are agonizing about their choice of major as if that's going to define what they do once they leave college. And I think we have to reformat advising to start to ask students early on, what is it that you want to accomplish in the world? Relieve the pressure that, the difference between being an anthropologist, a sociologist, and a political scientist is going to decide your future. And instead start to say, what's your mission? And what are the skills that you need to develop in order to achieve that mission? And beyond that, start thinking about a checklist of things that a well-prepared student will have. She should have an internship. She should probably study abroad. She should have done research. She should have done some kind of service. She should have been involved in figuring out how complex organizations work by being inside of those. And make that part of how we advise students. And that's going to be a change for a lot of places. It would be for my campus.
So I like to contextualize what my three colleagues said in the way of all those things said I think are important, and especially in today's landscape where we have so many opportunities for students to go so many places geographically, but also in terms of discipline. But also I think that we have to add that in some ways we have to go back to the beginning of liberal arts. Because as many people would agree, students coming to college today, the jobs that would be available when they graduate in 4 years are not available when they enter college today. So I think that we need that foundation of the liberal arts so that they can then educate themselves throughout their careers as their job opportunities and their professions will evolve.
Yeah, true, thank you. And the idea of even the applied humanities and thinking differently about what it takes to keep a community safe, make a community, help a community recover. And I'd be remiss if I didn't note that in the audience we have some deans of School of Social Welfare and Public Health and Policy here from the University at Albany. And again, I think it's all part of the collective power of the academy coming to deal with the problem. We have about 15 minutes left, so we've got time for questions from the audience. And I'm going to reiterate one of the points I started with, is that this is a full contact sport. So you got to get up and play. So let's hear some questions from you. Sir in the back. Are we running microphones or?
So who was it, Donahue that did this? Here you go.
I'll volunteer and I'll get the microphone around if you want, right? So thank you for an excellent panel. I want to maybe revisit what Jenny said, Jenny Evans, right? So you mentioned how we need to recognize things like RISE, and these may not be things that lead us to tenure, but they may be things that open us the door for resources, for things that are valued within the tenure process, right? So applied research, I'm an applied demographer. And so I was wondering, probably President Haddock, if you could elaborate on how from Puerto Rico within a financially constrained system, we can start appreciating more the efforts of faculty and efforts and platforms like RISE. How would we reward and promote these activities in a constrained environment, such as environments in which budget cuts are happening and they're being managed? If you could elaborate on that, and what can we, probably for Jenny, what processes or what steps can we take to incorporate applied research into processes such as tenure promoting processes, et cetera?
All right, I think that, first of all, we need to value it. And I think that the question is, how do we get to that point? The PNT, the promotion and tenure system, the metrics in academia belong to the faculty. So I think that these type of events where we have some of our best faculty leading these events are steps towards having our own faculty value their colleagues in the type of research that we do. The barriers that we have today is in some disciplines. They say if you don't hit the top 3 journals, then that publication is not worthy. And those top 3 journals tend to be rather theoretical. So it's up to the faculty to start valuing other type of journals, venues, and activities like this to be able to then work on our promotion and tenure system and even the hiring system, the way that we hire our faculty. So I think that these events are steps towards that. And we at the top, we will do our part. As a traditional academic myself, I'll do my part, but again, it has to really come from the bottom up. And we'll work together with the faculty to make that happen.
So what I was thinking was very much along those lines. I think that we need the upper echelons of the university management to be open to and really willing to hear about new ways and new metrics that we can use. And we need the faculty who are participating in the promotion and tenure process to really identify the critical ways that we can measure intellectual contributions and contributions to society that result in a new way. I don't have the answers as to what all of those metrics are, though.
I'll just jump in, though. It's also a situation, though, where faculty in their own promotion and tenure policies at the department and college level really need to think about how we start to measure impact as sort of an equal characteristic of achievement, in addition to sort of quantifying the number of articles.
Well, also in the university process, though, I have to be able to explain to a philosopher why this meteorology professor needs to get tenure. So we are already used to being able to put in context. We just have to be willing to have a different context.
Some other questions? I saw some additional hands, a lot of hands. Okay.
Hi, coming from Vieques, Puerto Rico, and my experiences. And I certainly appreciate the way you're going with this, and I thank you. One of the things that we figured out is that when the disasters were going on, nobody was really ready except first responders and people who were trained in it. We're talking about over 1 million students in SUNY, a lot of people if you count all the universities. What does it take to make mandatory the education for disasters, climate change, and even preparations for people to do this? I think if we're looking to multidisciplinary and we're looking to culture change, including something that takes 2, 3, 4 days. I never understood why they don't take CPR and first aid in high school. It takes 1 day. But what does it take at the college level to educate? Because we keep finding barriers between the disciplinary players. We keep finding people who are victims or survivors who can't handle it emotionally, physically, or know how to react. How we can make a clear, quick change, and including as mandatory for you graduating college or in all those disciplines, that you can at least survive disasters or understand climate science, whether you believe it's change or not. How can we make a quick change, and is it possible to rise?
You know, I think the idea of a mandatory change suggests that a college administration would say, this is going to be part of the curriculum. And that's a disaster, right? It's a disaster for administrators to get so deeply involved in curricular innovation. So I will answer with where I began. I think the power that we have as presidents, and that you all have as leaders of these issues on campus, is the almost unlimited potential we have to mobilize people around something that makes sense and is desperately needed. So we need to provoke this sense that David started with, that this is a potential extinction level event, and say, if that's true, if we really believe that's true, nothing is more important than this. Number two, recognize that if there's resistance to making this kind of training necessary, pervasive, eventually mandatory, it's not coming from our students. It's not. If you said to this generation, we're going to set aside, you know, a bunch of other stuff, and for a moment we're going to foreground this mandatory training to prevent climate change and to help our fellow human beings when they're in times of distress, they would all sign up. Right? So provoking that sense of urgency and turning to our faculty, all of us, and saying, this is so important that we've got to start thinking about setting aside time every year for every student to make this training important. That's how it's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen because a president says it has to happen. Well, it'll happen if a president provokes the mobilization of other people, but we need really deep partnerships with the faculty on this.
And I will also add to that it does take leadership at a variety of levels. And let me just talk about two examples, right? When we decide that as an institution, it is critically important to establish a college such as the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, that clearly focuses on educating students, not only in the college, but across the university on these critically important issues. And I know that the dean and the college are also working on establishing a service corps to get students engaged and prepared and responding to disaster types of initiatives. Or you take the example of SUNY New Paltz and the Center for Disaster Mental Health, which are now currently conducting a study across Puerto Rico in public institutions with high school teachers and elementary school teachers to identify the mental health impact and how to identify the impacts of these disasters on our students. That's another critical role that institutions of higher education can take by leveraging the resources, the institutional resources, identifying external resources, but saying this is critically important to us as an institution, let's move forward.
And if I could just add that, you know, what I'm looking for is the coalition of the willing. If you think about disaster sciences, if you think about the challenges of climate change, it affects every single program on campus, and those programs that want to work with us, it's a really big tent. But I could tell you, I need philosophers to be thinking about the ethics of decisions that we're making in these areas. I need the atmospheric scientists. I need the languages. If you start to think about all of these different programs that we could bring together, it makes my program stronger because I can't stand on my own, because by nature, emergency response is multidisciplinary, and that's the way we've got to approach the field. We have time for a couple more questions. And I love seeing the hands, and if we don't get your questions, thank you for at least being willing to ask. Yep.
Howdy, I come from Texas A&M, and my name is Jorge Vanegas, and I'm the Dean of the College of Architecture. you can't do anything of what we're talking without the built and the natural and the social and the virtual environment today. So I'm very glad to see that. But I want to make one point. I've gone to a lot of conferences, but this is the first time that I see presidents, chancellors, and the true leadership of universities talk like you have. So it gives me hope. Because when you say that the faculty own something, my experience as an intermediate leader and pretty much an accidental leader as dean is that I wish I could say yes, because there are some faculty that I wish were not the owners of the status quo, of the fear of change, of the static dynamic nature of their power, which today is not how it used to be. So unless we actually tackle the fundamental human behavior of those that have the opportunity to tap into all the resources that we all have, but choose not to, they're retired in place. And I call them the worst critics are the has-been wannabes who never were and never had a chance of being. And I think that that is at the core. You have a room full of passionate people. But this is the first time that I can say this, that the people that should be here are not here. But in this case, you are here, which I think is great. But there's still a lot of people that should be here that are not here. That's just a comment. There is no question. I just have to say that.
Hi, my name is Daniel Soto. I'm from Sonoma State University in California. I had a question sort of building on that. I was also surprised by the idea, or by your statement, that the faculty do own the tenure process. We see counterexamples of that. But I guess my question is, are there examples of social shifts in values that have occurred in faculty that you see from your sort of vantage point as professors that we could use, and maybe what are the generalizable examples from those shifts in faculty values that can create the kind of more sort of engagement that we see? Like, I was interested to hear Albany has these sort of engagement-based academic structures rather than the like kind of knowledge taxonomy structures that we have from the last couple hundred years. So are there examples of these value shifts that have removed our impediment values and helped strengthen the values that communities of scholars could have to make these more relevant impacts?
So this may be similar to the SUNY system, I'm not sure, but at Penn State I mentioned the institute that I run. There are 5 of those institutes that extend across all 24 campuses. And the point of that is, if you think of the departments and colleges as very deep in a particular discipline, that we knit across those disciplines and make it valuable and valued to do that. And that came down to what I talked about before with communication, that to do that you have to be able to communicate. But you have the advantage too of being able to ask a tough question with someone who has deep knowledge and who wants to understand across a broad area. And to me that's a real paradigm shift, and one that we really need.
Maybe just to add a little bit of nuance to something I said earlier, you know, the Campus Compact, which has been this organization promoting service learning, they will beat the drum repeatedly and say no change to implant, for instance, service learning accomplishments in a tenure process will take place on a campus without leadership at the very highest level, president, provost, deans, all of that. But I think leadership at that level is exercised through voice, example, and exhortation more than legislation. And that's kind of what I meant by partnership. Ultimately, a faculty senate or whatever the peer evaluation decision-making body on campus has to decide to move in that direction as they evaluate their colleagues. I think it's our job to say, this is okay. It's more than okay. It's a priority of the university to start recognizing and cultivating that talent.
So yes, the short answer to the question, yes, I've seen a few where he's been able to be influenced by administration, deans, department chairs. I think for most cases that I've seen, especially in research-oriented universities, they're organic. They do happen through time. And in most instances, again, anecdotally, no matter what the dean, as a dean, I tell the faculty they're going to do what faculty do. However, I've seen some where the metrics have been changed and effectively here in the States and abroad in foreign countries. It's just, in my experience, again, anecdotally, the more research-oriented the university, the more difficult it is to do that.
So I'll answer it another way. When I first started in climate science, it was very clearly the meteorologist's domain, maybe the geoscientists as well, if we wanted to go into the deep history. And then people started talking about climate change, and some people really jumped on it and were passionate about it within the climate community, and many of us needed a lot more convincing and a lot more thinking about what was the underlying evidence and could we buy into that evidence. And it was almost like a slinky or a concertina where some people jumped out ahead and many of us hung back, and then it sort of unwound over time, right? And more people started to get to the place I think we are in this room today. And at the same time, the slinky got wider. We realized that it wasn't all the Navier-Stokes equations or whatever your favorite reference frame is. And so we got this broader group, and this group who'd started off down here and kind of stretched out and then in a whole new place. And I'd say that's a pretty big cultural shift.
Thank you so much. We are out of time. I will note for our students that you can look up the Donahue Show and Slinkies on Wikipedia to figure out what the heck we were talking about. Teresa, you have a few comments before I dismiss the panel.
Yep, okay. Please join me in thanking the panel and Bob for their remarks. So my name is Teresa Puerto. I'm one of the members of the steering committee. I'm on the faculty here at UAlbany and run a research center. But my job is a very important one here. I have several public service announcements. So let me tell you, first of all, if you noticed in your program, we have a list of the 65 posters that have been contributed by students from across the participant community here, from an even wider network. And what we'd like to be sure that you do is take some time. As President Rodriguez said, these are the future leaders of this community. Take some time, look at the posters, but then vote, right? So you'll see on this handout that we have a website set up for you to vote. Respond to those ideas, engage with those ideas, and tell us what you think about them. Second, we have, following the morning break, which I understand you're ready to get to the break, but we have a set of 7 panels. 5 of them, as you can see in your program, are here in the campus center, and 2 of them are in our Performing Arts Center. For those of you who are going to the Performing Arts Center, as you heard earlier, it is November in Albany. Bring your coat, or walk very, very quickly. It's your choice, but I would recommend the coat. For those of you who are going there, we do have volunteers along the way to help you navigate from here to the various facilities here in the Performing Arts Center, as well as to the, the facilities at the Performing Arts Center and here within the campus center. If you are a self-navigator, there's maps in the program book on pages 62 and 63. Following the panels, we're going to transition directly into lunch. You'll see in the program, we're actually put on your seats in the panels another cheat sheet about how to navigate the rest of the afternoon. Those of you who are in the Performing Arts Center, please head to the Assembly Hall for your lunch. Those of you who are in these other locations, we ask you to head to the ballroom. Following the lunch, we'll have a keynote speaker at 1 o'clock. And we'll let you know at that time when that speaker is about to begin, so that you can either move to the ballroom or stay in the assembly hall, where we will have simulcast of that talk. So you'll have time, if you're in the middle of your lunch, to continue your lunch in either case. Following the keynote, which will be at about 2 o'clock before the afternoon break, We're going to have a quick informational session on one of the very, very unique aspects of the RISE community and this RISE conference, and those are the cohort discussions that will take place this afternoon. As you'll see we'll have one of our cohort leader, Jacob Mann, tell us about the importance of those sessions, and then we'll give you instructions about how to go to your session and spend out the rest of the afternoon. Again, there's a What's Next guide you'll pick up in your panel session, and we wish you a productive day. Thank you very much.